Good morning. This is Jason Van Gilder filling in for Amanda Carson as the chair of the meeting. I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask Terry to call the roll.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, I'm going to go through roll call. Richard Beck.
Here.
Stacy Dupuy.
Here.
Michaela Owens.
Here.
Hannah Schaefer for Cody Homan.
Here.
Tom Laws.
Here.
Alex Yan.
Here.
Bob Callahan. Lindy Lindstrom. Clay Tucker. Emily Bunn.
Here.
Dan Lister. Carla Nelson.
Here.
Bree Brush.
Here.
Deanna Dupuy. Nina Schaefer.
Here.
Nikki Binyacliff.
Here.
Haley Hart. Caitlin Davidson.
Here.
Andrew Glassbell.
Here.
Hannah Veal.
Here.
Ruben Flores for Lee Belt. Troy Behunin. Marina Lundy.
Here.
Daryl Romine.
Here.
Craig Bergman. Caleb Hood.
Present.
Brian McClure.
Here.
Jason Van Gilder.
Present.
Crystal Craig.
Here.
Clemente Salinas.
Here.
Mark Stoyer. Rob Hartsock. Matt Quells. Sean Nickel.
Morning. Here.
Cindy Tinker.
Here.
Chelsea Johnson. Bud Corbus. Al Hofer. Crystal Rogers. Joe McMullen. Alexa Reutman.
Here.
Zach Pipemeyer. Michael Toole.
Good morning. I'm here.
Aaron Bodges. Isaac Josephic. Stephen Hunt.
Here.
Miranda Carson. Curtis Lovelace.
Present.
Cody Lund. And myself, I am present.
Thank you, Tony. Moving on to our next item of open discussion and announcements. I know I have an announcement from Amy Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I just wanted to remind you all of the August 3rd and 4th education series coming up on using human factors to help improve our planning and design for our transportation system. It'll be here in this room the evening of Monday, August 3rd from 6 to 8 p.m. and then a more technical presentation the morning of August 4th, also in this room from 9 to 11 a.m. I believe I said PM, or excuse me, I believe I said AM on the 3rd. That would be PM. I encourage you all to attend. Please RSVP to Josie Gallup if you're interested in attending, or you can just see me after this meeting. There are flyers, if you're in the room, on the back table about the meeting or about the education series, and you also should be receiving emails in your inbox. So encourage you to attend and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other announcements?
Mr. Chair.
Crystal.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. I just wanted to give a big congratulations to the city of Boise for their over $5 million build grant award. It's really exciting that that project to extend Lake Hazel is going to be huge for the valley and regional transportation as a whole. So I was really, really excited to see that. So great job, Boise.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Crystal.
And a congratulations to Crystal as well, as Napa received a build grant as well. Is that correct?
We did. Thank you.
Yes.
Also very excited for our build grant.
Thank you. Not hearing any other announcements. Moving on to the consent agenda. We have the meeting minutes from June 24th, 2026. Motion to approve.
Mr. Chair, this is Tom.
Tom?
I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you. Do I hear a second? I hear a second from Aaron Bogus. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Was that one opposed, or is that?
That was an aye. Sorry.
All right. I assumed it was, but motion approved unanimously. Moving on to action items. Item A is our recommendation of the fiscal year 28, 30 to 34 Compass application guide. Matt Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, good morning. My name is Matt Carlson, Principal Planner here at Compass, and I will wait for the slides. Looks like they're good to go now. Yes. All right. Thank you. I am presenting the draft 2028 to 2034. Tony, would you like me to wait, or are we good to go? All right. Thank you. The 2028 to 2034 Compass Funding Application Guide. This item is seeking your recommendation for the Compass Board of Directors approval and is an action item. Today, I will briefly review the purpose and components of the guide, highlight the primary changes in this year's update, and review the scoring and ranking process. The guide is provided in full as a supplemental attachment in the packet. The application guide is the foundational document for the Compass project application process. It sets out the roles and responsibilities of all parties and is meant to serve as a resource throughout the application process. The guide describes the call for projects process and the timeline. The priorities developed using this process feed into the allocation of federal and local dollars, as well as the development of the resource development plan and member service requests, also called UPWP requests. Including in this guide is information pertaining to the funding sources, the estimates of the available funding, the application schedule and key deadlines, a sample application, and the project scoring and ranking procedures, which is the focus of this year's update. This update incorporates funding sources that were made available with the IIJA, the Investing in Infrastructure and Jobs Act, into the funding estimates. The application has been revamped for the ease of use for you all, and the updated scoring process has been improved by building on existing Compass planning products and through the feedback of yourselves. I want to highlight the distinction between scored and unscored projects. Unscored projects include applications for local funds. Those are the applications for the Project Development Program and the Communities in Motion Implementation Grants, as well as studies, special projects, and the Unified Planning and Work Program, or UPWP, member service requests. These unscored projects are prioritized using the paired comparison process and is identical to previous years, so that was unchanged. Turning to the scored projects, these are project applications for capital and maintenance improvements using federal aid funding, including Surface Transportation Block Grant, Transportation Alternatives Program, and carbon reduction funds. Projects that align with the priority identified in the Long Range Transportation Plan, Communities in Motion, are given a CIM score. All projects are scored according to their contribution to the regional vision and goals and objectives of Communities in Motion. So projects receive a CIM score and a TIP score, which are combined into a total score. The scores are an informative tool to help structure discussion and decision-making. Moving to the scoring criteria, It combines a number of compass planning products structured around the regional vision and goals described in the Long Range Transportation Plan, CIM 2050. The criteria provide an objective evaluation of the project's impact that can help foster conversations and facilitates comparison between those projects. Safety has been emphasized in the scoring criteria for several years and receives the most points, but all compass priorities and goal areas are represented. Additionally, local preference and project readiness are captured in the bonus section. After going through the scoring process this year, Compass staff and you all understood that it could still be improved again. The scoring criteria used to evaluate these applications were updated with the assistance of a subcommittee, which included representation from Ada County Highway District, Valley Regional Transit, and the cities of Boise, Nampa, Kuna, and Middleton. The subcommittee met twice and reviewed all components of the guide, but the majority of the changes focused on the scoring supplemental and the application because those are the key for you to apply for funding. This is a breakdown of the score. There are 3 categories, which include alignment with Communities in Motion 2050, project readiness, and a CIM 2050 project score. The scoring process is fleshed out by detailed criteria and thresholds customized for each mode of transportation, and then we tested them on sample projects. The scoring process is underpinned by detailed criteria for each mode, including roadway, active transportation, and public transportation. The criteria knits together a number of Compass planning products, including the Communities in Motion 2050 priorities, the Regional Safety Action Plan, Regional Crash Safety Data, the I-84 Operations Plan and Treasure Valley TISMO Plan, Pavement, Bridge, and Facility Condition, the Complete Network Policy, the Equity Analysis, the Compass Environmental Index, and the Bike Walk Compass Tool, the Pathway Facility Condition collected by the Compass Data Bike, and 3 new plans that were adopted this year, the Carbon Reduction Strategy, the Resilience Improvement Plan, and the Coordinated Waterway Pathway Plan. So all of these planning tools contribute to the evaluation of these products. A summary of changes that were made to the scoring supplemental. We added questions to the phase 2 application based on those 3 new Compass planning products, the Carbon Reduction Strategy, the Resilience Improvement Plan, and the Coordinated Regional Waterway Pathway Plan. That is a mouthful. The phase 1 and 2 applications have also been simplified for use by you all, and Compass will provide the applicants with some of the necessary data so you guys can confirm it. We believe this process offers a number of benefits, including increased integration with all of those Compass planning activities. The process should improve alignment of the short-range TIP funding decisions with the Long-Range Transportation Plan, Communities in Motion 2050. Additionally, this process integrates several Compass planning products. As I've referenced, this process will help structure conversations and comparison of project applications, as well as improving our performance-based planning efforts, which is an important federal requirement. We hope that we've streamlined the application and improved the experience for you all. Moving forward, I seek your recommendation today so that this can go to the board in August, and then we will be ready to open first call for project applications in September. Those member service requests will open in February, and then we will hold a second application opportunity in April for those local programs, Communities in Motion implementation grants, and the project development program. If anyone that participated in the subcommittee has anything to add, that'd be greatly appreciated, and I will open it up for questions or comments.
Thank you, Matt. Nice job, and thank you for leading that subcommittee. Any questions for Matt?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Matt, the only question I have is when you present to the board, will you go into more detail as to like what the specific changes were, or do you have a ready summary of like the details of the changes?
Mr. Chair, Stephen, I believe the board item is actually on the consent agenda. So to answer your question, no. I do have a red line version of the changes that we did make. if it would be helpful. That was not sent out in the packet. It was sent out to the subcommittee, which you were on. If the committee would appreciate a detailed summary of the changes, we can certainly provide that.
I'll take a look at the red line summary. That'll be enough, I think. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Not hearing any, I'll entertain a motion to recommend approval to the Compass Board of Directors.
Mr. Chair, I move that the RTAC recommend the Compass Board of Directors approve the FY 28 to 34 funding application guide.
Thank you, Stephen. Do I have a second?
Sure, I'll second that.
I heard a second from Alex.
That's great.
All right, hearing a motion moved and seconded, call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Waiting a second so that we don't confuse the ayes and the nays. All opposed, nay. Not hearing any of the motions unanimous. Thank you, Matt. Our next action item for today is to recommend the fiscal year 2027 Communities in Motion Implementation Grants and Project Development Program projects. Again, Matt Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, I'm still me. I'll be presenting the Communities in Motion Implementation Grants and the Project Development Program rankings. This item is seeking your recommendation for Compass Board approval. Today, we'll go over the ranking process, the project's preliminary rankings, and the next steps moving forward. The Compass Resource Development Program identifies member needs through the application process and then funnels those needs into the appropriate funds. For today, Communities in Motion Implementation Grants and the Project Development Program. Greg likes to call this slide the Elton John sunglasses. Timeline of the application process. We opened this second round of applications from April to May. You all did a paired comparison ranking from June 3rd to June 17th, and now you will recommend the projects in their final rankings for approval to the Compass Board of Directors. The criteria knits together a number of Compass planning products and is structured around the regional vision and goals described in the Long Range Transportation Plan, Communities in Motion. The criteria have an objective evaluation of project impact that helps foster conversations and facilitate comparisons between those projects, and these projects follow the paired comparison ranking process. For the Communities in Motion Implementation Grants, we received 5 applications from 5 member agencies. The Willis Road Pedestrian Crosswalk from the City of Middleton, the Alpine and Laytoss Interim Safety Improvements from the City of Boise, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Map Update from the City of Nampa, the Chip Seal Project for City of Wilder, and the Ada County Bike Map Update from the Ada County Highway District. Here are the preliminary rankings for these projects that followed the paired comparison process that you all did with the number of times the project was selected as that score in the right-hand column. We have $100,000 requested in the fiscal year 2027 budget for this program. At this point, you can now adjust these rankings if needed. The green line marks the funding cutoff. We have enough funding to fund the top 2 selected projects. So is there any discussion about the preliminary rankings at this time?
Anything from our virtual attendees? I'm not seeing any in the room. I don't think so, Matt.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the Project Development Program, we received 3 applications from 3 member agencies. The Willis Road and Hartley Lane intersection improvements from the City of Middleton, the Amity Pathway Feasibility Study from the City of Boise, and the Friendship Bridge concept from Boise State University. These are the preliminary rankings, and the score was the number of times the project was selected on the right-hand column. We have $150,000 budgeted for FY 2027, so we have enough to fund these 3 projects. So now you understand the project's rankings and you had the opportunity to adjust them if necessary. Following your recommendation today, the project rankings will go to the Compass Board of Directors approval. In the August meeting, Compass staff will begin negotiating agreements with the awarded members in September, and the first call for projects will open in September. Here we go again. Any questions?
Any questions for Matt? Tony?
I have one clarification, just to make sure it's clear that the fiscal year 2027 budget is not approved yet. It is recommended at those funding levels, but until the board approves that Unified Planning Work Program, it's not final.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I have a question and a comment. First is, Matt, can you remind us, I feel like in the past, RTAC has had discussions about awarding the same city multiple grants from the different programs. Is that in policy at all, or am I misremembering?
Mr. Chair, Tom. Understanding your question, the policy states that under the same program, no member agency can be awarded twice unless we don't have enough applicants. So in this case, they're two different programs. And so that is allowed.
Thank you for that. And then the comment would be, this just, highlights once again all the need that the partners have, and I'd encourage Compass at the creation of the draft next year to request additional funding, both to allow us to have more applications be awarded, but then also to increase the amount that we can distribute per project, because 50,000 really just doesn't go a long ways these days.
Mr. Chair, Tom, thank you. Yes. Yes, I'm in agreement with you. I've noticed that over the years. If I guess the intent would be to increase the budget for these programs, I would recommend that a member agency submit a written request to the executive director. So that could go in front of the finance committee and the executive committee to provide discussion early in the process.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Was that City of Nampa?
Yeah, Crystal Craig, City of Nampa. Just to continue building on that conversation, I agree that there's needs across. So I would love to see additional funding be put to this. If for any reason additional funding becomes available in the Communities in Motions grants, I know that City of Nampa and City of Wilder scored very, very similarly, with City of Nampa being slightly higher. Nampa's preference would be for Wilder to get the grant over us. I think their budget is a little bit smaller than ours. So I really like to see the smaller cities and the implementation type things get done instantaneously. So for the record, if more money becomes available, Nampa would like to see Wilder get it over us.
Thank you, Crystal. That's very magnanimous of both you and Nampa. Reflects well on both your agency. Can I take that as an amendment to the motion as provided? Would be to adjust that ranking?
Yes, please. I would love to make a motion to adjust the ranking as stated, and then otherwise approve as stated on the screen.
All right.
Mr. Chair, this is Bree from Boise. I'll second that.
Thank you, Bree. Do you have any discussions on, that is one motion, so I don't believe that's an amendment to the motion. That's the original motion. Do you have any discussion on the motion as amended? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Not hearing any, I'll take that as a unanimous motion on that. And Middleton thanks you as well. Moving on to item C. Recommend updates to Transportation Improvement Program policies and procedures. Tony Tisdale.
Hey, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you. This is an item for the updates to the policies and procedures. We haven't done updates in a while, since last year, at least for part of the policies. And this year, we're going to be talking about all of them. So we will get started on an overview of the process. We have updates on 6 of the TIP policies and 2 procedures, and then we'll cover the timeline on what's next. So as you know, the Resource Development Program my team provides the mechanism to bring additional funding into the Treasure Valley. And one of those things is definitely the federal funding side. And these policies provide the sideboards and the guidance from the Compass Board of Directors on how projects are prioritized and how funds get allocated throughout the region. So this is a really important process for both us as well as you as making recommendations to the Compass Board for what gets funded. So very important process here. We are looking at numerous policies and procedures. So the 6 policies are the TIP annual update policy, the amendments, balancing, how federal aid funding is eligible, the funding targets. We've known that as the funding policy through Communities in Motion in the past, rural prioritization, both for the MPO areas and now the non-MPO areas. We're working on that as well. And then procedures that we have are changes to the TIP, how to request those changes, as well as the delivery of federal aid projects and making changes to those. The urban balancing rulebook, I'll touch on this in just a moment. This is going to be considered an addendum to the policies. It's a statewide process, but it also has a big influence on how the NAMPA urban funds are delivered. So we're including that as well. So as we went through our annual review this year to see if there were any changes that were making it easier to find information, Craig was pretty new to our process this year. So as we were pulling from a lot of different places, and I'm sure y'all have noticed that as you're looking for policies. So he suggested that we combine them all into one place so that it's easier to use. And so we've completely reformatted all of the TIP policies and procedures into one combined document. And since we did have so many changes to how it looks, actually not really that many changes to the meat of the policies, but we do not have a red line at this time for you to compare, but we did compile all of the existing policies and procedures into one PDF so that you could fairly easily compare them. The memo does provide that substantive changes to all of these policies, and hopefully we've outlined those in a way that makes sense as you reviewed. So we'll go through each of these policies. The TIP update policy, we really didn't have any substantial changes there, really just a formatting change. For the balancing policy, we had two changes that were considered substantial. These are red here. They're not red in your packet, but to make on number 2, when we were removing exempt projects, we realized as we were processing throughout the year that we could add or remove without board action, but we couldn't change. And so we've added the ability, if a project is exempt, that we could also make a major change or advance or delay with public comment, but we can do that with the staff approval. And then we added the footnote number 4 that allows the Compass Executive Director to determine if there is a significant major change. There has been a couple of instances where maybe we met the $5 million threshold, but there were really no major changes to the project. It was just inflation, basically. The cost ended up being more in the long run. Taking that out for public comment seems to create more confusion than anything else. And so we wanted a way to give a waiver for something that would create more confusion than clarification, taking information out for public comment. That's the intent of what that change would be used for. Then on the balancing policy, I'm going to be a little embarrassed here and let you know that as I went through this and looked at it 100,000 times, this one is really not needed. You might notice, as you know, when you see it on a slide, and I was like, oh my goodness, that's basically the same thing as B. So in the long run, I would recommend removing this one in your motion if you choose to make a recommendation to move forward with this today. I originally thought that we didn't have a cost increase for current year projects, but it's basically provided in B. So ignore that one. And then on the balancing policy on number 4, these are the projects that are started or originated in non-SDBG TAP or carbon reduction programs. So these are not the programs that you make a decision to fund, but they're outside. However, they could be eligible for these programs and for balancing in these programs. So they are a lower priority, but we realized that some of the order of the priorities were a little bit different than the ones inside the program. So we're trying to make those more consistent. So we're making that recommendation. For the federal highway funding eligibility, no real substantive changes there. Funding policy, we just changed the off the top funds. You'll remember back in April. And so we incorporated those changes, but the main change here is that it's moving from a communities in motion policy to a TIP policy because it really is more influential on how TIP projects are funded and selected. The rural prioritization process within the MPO areas remains steady, no substantive changes there, but it is included. And then as we talked last month, we are working currently with the non-MPO areas, so the counties of Boise and Elmore County. We'll have a rural prioritization process for them, but it is in process, so it's there as a placeholder now, but not included in this process. It'll probably take us 4 to 5 months to get to the point to add this one in, but we'll be working on that with the 2 newer counties and give them a process to receive those extra points. And then on our procedures, we really had no substantive changes on these, but we did need to update the contact information, changing to make sure that Craig Rayborn is the contact for all of those changes that are coming in. Then the addendum, we've added the urban balancing rulebook. This doesn't really affect anyone other than the Nampa urban area, and it is a statewide procedure, but we felt that it was important to include that in there as information. The board wouldn't necessarily be approving the addendum, but it's in there for information so everyone is aware of what the rules are for the statewide process for balancing. So last week, and granted, I haven't given the federal agencies and ITD very much time to review. Since there weren't very many updates that were substantial, I was hoping to get some comment back before the RTEC meeting, but I have not. I'm hoping that if there are anything substantial concerns from the federal agencies or ITD, that we would be able to provide any changes that are necessary for the Compass board. If you are comfortable making a recommendation to move forward, we can do that, or we can wait until October to take it to the Compass board. That is your prerogative. We can see where the questions go today. So I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you,
Okay.
Tony. Was that Crystal?
It was Crystal,
Okay,
yeah.
good. Yes.
Tony, can you give a quick description of what type of projects are exempt versus non-exempt? And then based on our tip, how many of the projects percentage-wise-ish are non-exempt?
We've had, the percentage isn't great, but anything that is let me see if I can give you kind of a high level. It's going to be sidewalks, most public transportation, unless it's a new service, and operations. Those are the main exempt projects. So there have been a few, but it's not the majority of projects that we've been making changes through this process.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Tony, can you speak to what drove the clarification for language in the non-Compass programs? Was that, as we can see today, there's been a lot more competitive grants being awarded in the Valley. Is that why we're looking to clarify that language?
Right. For the non-program language, hold on, let me get there. So this is what you're talking about, right? For balancing. Yes, we do have at times there are needs, and I'll give you an example. The most recent one is a project in the city of Nampa that is a freight project. And it's coming in almost double. We'll be going out for public comment soon on that, so you'll be seeing information. We wanted to make it eligible just in case, who knows what's going to come up. The chances of funding some of these projects that don't originate within the programs is pretty slim, but we don't know what's coming in future funding. And so it's good to have the option to be able to fund some of these needs, even if they don't originate in the program, as long as they're eligible.
For item D, is that just advanced construction, or what does that term mean?
Right, advancing the construction phase. So like so the A would be anything under contract or current year. D would be if it was like in 29 and you're moving it to 26.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Aaron.
Tony, on the amendment policy, is the major change in location or project limits, is that defined anywhere? And who makes that determination?
Yes, it's number 4 is of course I didn't bring my glasses up here.
Number 3 on that chart.
I'm sorry.
Number 3 up there, 3B and C. How
Right.
those define major change in scope and location.
So most of the time on a scope change, it would be 1/4 mile. And then of course the dollar amount is there, 5 million or 30% and $1 million are kind of the limits. There have been times where it was like 5,100,000 but it was $150 million project. So it's not really changing anything about the project, and taking it out to the public is, I don't know, it just seems more confusing than transparent. There are times, and there's also sometimes where 1/4 mile, maybe it's just past 1/4 mile. And so it's not really changing the way that like maybe an intersection crossing or something would be used. But really that would be up to the executive director to decide. And he most of the time would probably choose to be more open and transparent and share. Sometimes timing is a huge issue. And when the change is very minor comparatively, but it hits these thresholds, it just seems to be kind of over the top for going out for public comment and board action. Right, the definitions are in the footnotes. I was trying to find it. So it's not in your packet, it's on the supplemental. The document was pretty large, so there is more information on that footnote.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none. Actually, Tony, would you like the motion amended to not include the once the balancing policy at change?
Yes, please.
All right. Is there a motion to, let's see, the motion we're looking for is to recommend to the Compass Board of Directors approval of the updated and consolidation of all policies affecting the TIP, with the exception of the balancing policy listed in the packet below. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chair, clarification. I think we're only looking at removing balancing policy 1A.
Correct.
All right.
I'd be open to make the motion that we recommend consolidation and changes to the TIP policies as discussed, with exception of balancing policy 1A.
Thank you. Hearing the motion, do I hear a second?
Mr. Chair, second.
All right, I hear a second. Any more discussion? Calling for the question. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any nays? Hearing none, we'll assume that we'll take that as approved unanimously.
Mr. Chair, as a follow-up, if we do hear concerns back from ITD or Federal Highways or Federal Transit Administrations, we will let you know that, and depending on how concerns come in, if there are any, we will share that with the board, and it could come back to you or it could continue to move forward, but we will let you know if there are any concerns.
Thank you. Item D, recommend communities in motion 2055 project prioritization methodology. Austin Miller.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of RTAC, Austin Miller, Principal Planner, Planning Team Lead here at Compass. As noted, I will be seeking your recommendation regarding the project prioritization for Communities in Motion 2055. This item begins on page 13 in your packet. Overview of what I want to chat about with you all today is one, just expectations, sort of what I need out of today's meeting, what I'm hoping to achieve. Then we can dive into, I want to make sure by the end of this, you all have a good understanding of what we're doing here, why we're doing it, how we got to where we are. So the process we've taken, how is this going to be used? So specifically, how is it informing the next steps of the development of the Regional Long Range Transportation Plan? I'll pause for questions, and then ultimately we'll get to that recommended motion. Starting off with those expectations, first I'm going to call y'all out a little bit. You've been very quiet today. We're very ahead on time, so if you have any questions, that's what that portion's for. Glad to chat about any of them. But what I need today is a recommendation to the Compass Board for our roadway project prioritization to include for Communities in Motion 2050, at least by the August board meeting. And we'll get into the reason for that here in a moment. But really, it's not saying you all have to agree perfectly with what's in the packet, but if you want to see changes, please just make sure it's clear to me as to what those preferred changes are that you would like to see, and I'm glad to bring that to the Compass Board of Directors. What I want, or something that would be ideal, is you all to feel comfortable with all of the other prioritization processes. So we'll get to active transportation, public transportation, and then rail crossing prioritization as well will be part of today's conversation. However, frankly, those are a little bit tighter on, or a little bit less tight on the schedule than the roadways. So we chatted with you all as well as the board of directors on a high level summary of the direction we're thinking back in the spring. We're here before you all today seeking your recommendation to the Compass board that we can then take to them in August, and then throughout the fall and winter, I'll be coming back periodically to review the scoring. Do we have the appropriate universe of projects identified in the plan? How each of those scored, some of that initial funding conversation as we work to build out the prioritized project list for inclusion in the Regional Long Range Transportation Plan. Specifically for the roadway component, and why I'm hoping for it, putting the emphasis on that one. That one includes modeling work, which takes a bit of time, iteration, few more conversations with you all. So just to make sure we have ample time to do that process, that's really the emphasis for that process today. Noting that the next board meeting is basically Halloween, would really prefer to have direction before then. So for the prioritization process, what are we doing? Is we want to make sure we're creating a data-informed decision-making process for inclusion with the plan. To me, I keep describing this as it's essentially a math formula that can help us consistently prioritize the regionally significant projects. It's going to be used to inform those future decision-making processes and the discussions that feed them, again, in those coming months. And one thing that's been important to us as we've developed these processes is making sure that what's measured matters. It's not going to be all-inclusive. We've pared down the list of measures from Communities in Motion 2050 to really make sure we're emphasizing the big ticket items that are going to have a regional impact. Something that came to mind for me when I was going through this process is the scene from The Incredibles where Syndrome talks about, if everyone is special, no one is. And we sort of had that in mind as we were going through this. We know there's a lot of considerations, but we really wanted to pare it down to what are those big regional considerations we should be focusing on. So we're doing that because we want to identify what projects are most beneficial to the region. So we want to be able to provide that regional perspective to our local decision makers as they work to make those decisions as to what projects get funded. We want to provide clarity in the region's direction and direction we are taking with the transportation system. We want to make sure we're being clear to the public so they can see where we're planning to go. And then, frankly, we want to make sure that we're supporting those future funding efforts and conversations. So if it's policy discussion, we're just having a little bit of that with Tony. Is it policy discussion at the state or federal level? We want to make sure we're supporting those conversations as well as our local programs through the TIP. While we are focusing on those big ticket items, you all, we've actually, Alexa, I believe, gave you the briefing about a year ago now on the Move What Matters survey. We went out to the public and asked them what they wanted to see most out of the transportation system. What are the outcomes they want? And what are the most important goal areas in communities in motion that we can emphasize through this prioritization process? With safety and convenience receiving the most votes, followed by quality of life and economic vitality. And we had that in mind as we were going through building out the prioritization methodology. Another thing that is also front of mind for me as Compass staff, and I want you to make sure we are doing this throughout the process, is making sure that the various processes we have at Compass are all aligned and supporting each other in the same direction. So for Communities in Motion 2055, we wanted to make sure that we are prioritizing based on the goals and objectives that have been set by the Compass Board of Directors with recommendation from you all, as well as our congestion management process, which was adopted back in 2022. We want to make sure that that aligns with the funding policy that Tony's been talking about, that we're allocating our funding to align with those Communities in Motion outcomes we're hoping to achieve, and that the TIP, through how we are prioritizing the allocation of those funds, that it is also done in conjunction with the Communities in Motion goals and obviously consistent with the funding policy, which is guiding that process. In order to build these methodologies, we've leaned on our work groups to really focus on a specific process and gotten to the weeds, which each of these groups through various meetings. So really wanted to just thank those of you who have participated. I see a lot of familiar faces from those meetings in this room. However, I understand that not all of you were necessarily in every meeting. So as we go through these processes, if you have any questions, please let me know. We have Brent here and Gus online. They've helped lead some of these meetings. So thank you to them as well to answer any questions or clarification as needed. Without further ado, let's dive into the roadway project prioritization that we're proposing for you all today. So in this prioritization, we have two main scoring categories. One is alignment with the Communities in Motion 2055 goals and objectives. That's a bulk of the scoring at 100 points. Also, alignment with that congestion management process is an additional 30 points, and we'll talk through how points are awarded for each of those real briefly. Greater information was provided in your packet. So for Communities in Motion 2055, focusing on those goals, the main goal areas are safety, convenience, quality of life, and economic vitality. You can see the max score for each of those goal areas is aligned with the feedback that we had received in the Move What Matters survey. For safety, we're proposing to focus on three main scoring factors using the high injury network as identified in our regional safety action plan. To identify those corridors with safety risks along them and prioritizing projects that can help address the risk that has been identified in our regional safety action plan. Similarly, we recently adopted our resilience plan, so using the outcomes of that to identify critical projects within our region that do have a risk to natural events and make sure that we're addressing those through our project prioritization. And then the strategic highway network is actually a federal requirement that this be considered for roadway corridors that are critical for national defense. So we don't have a ton around here. However, if a project is on that list, we do want to make sure that we are prioritizing that as well. For convenience, this is where we'll be leaning on our regional travel demand model and the outputs of that. So we have vehicle miles traveled, and specifically looking at how a specific project might be able to reduce that. This is a good measure of the overall performance of the roadway network. And then we have the travel time index, which is a measure of delay. So if you compare free flow speeds 2 in the morning to rush hour, how much longer does it take to traverse a corridor? Looking at that corridor level functionality, how viable is it for members of our community to travel across the region using the improvements proposed by this project? For quality of life, we have 2 scoring factors identified. Our opportunity areas, which is a little bit of a rebranding from our equity index, if you are familiar with that. So looking at certain characteristics around the region that might identify opportunity for additional benefit to come to that area for a project. And then we have environmental considerations, which we've worked with our environmental review work group to look at what are those key factors, historic, hydrological considerations that we want to make sure we're aware of upfront when considering a project, as those can certainly change the scope and project cost if we're impacting those. For economic vitality, we have 3 main scoring factors. One being bridges, looking at where bridges are currently in poor condition, as well as looking at where there's just relatively older bridges, as this plan is looking nearly 30 years out. A bridge that might be in fair condition today might not be in fair condition 20 years from now. So looking at the age of the bridge to help that inform where we're looking for some of our regional projects. And then bringing in the Compass Complete Network policy. So we're looking for freight in transit in the Complete Network policy. Corridors are identified as a priority or secondary for each of these different modes of travel. Roadways that are priorities for these obviously get more points. Roadways that are a little bit lesser of a priority for these modes receive less points. Similarly, our Complete Network policy identifies bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And for roadway project prioritization, we really want to make sure that we're helping build out that network. So assuming that a roadway project is done consistent with policy and includes active transportation facilities alongside it, to make sure that those facilities are tying into the overall network and making connections to our regional pathways, additional points can be awarded for that.
Austin, you asked for questions during the thing. Could I interject one here?
Absolutely.
When you talk about bridges and you talked about looking at bridges that might be outdated in 30 years, that kind of makes them all not special because they're all going to be 30 years older in 30 years. Could we look at prioritizing bridges that become bottlenecks? Sometimes bridges that are not need to be replaced have problems getting funding because they're in too good of condition, but they're the bottleneck of the bridge that time. Would that be something we could adjust here as we look at bridges?
So by bottleneck, just to make sure I'm understanding, is if say a project in Communities in Motion says that potentially 5 travel lanes are needed on, we'll say Middleton Road.
Yes.
But there's an existing 2-lane bridge, that differentiation in number of lanes.
Yes, that's what I'm aiming for. Some of those bridges that are in good condition are really not eligible for your bridge replacement programs. They tend to get stuck and are expensive projects to fund.
Yeah, I think that's something that I could be able to add to a scoring process if that's the direction that RTAC and then ultimately the board wants to make. That's something that feels very reasonable to get included.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, Mr. Aaron.
Since we're interjecting questions, I had a question on the environmental considerations. I guess I didn't quite understand the way you explained it. So are they getting a reduction in points for environmental impacts, or they're getting points for mitigation of the environmental impacts?
Yeah.
How does that play into it, I guess?
Mr. Chair, Aaron, we worked with our environmental work group to make sure we were looking at the appropriate list of environmental data. So we were working to look at what is migration range, what's the hydrological activity, how many historic properties are potentially along a corridor. And then essentially, if we have the appropriate list of things we should be considering and the most up-to-date data on each of those categories, a project that is likely going to impact more of those would receive less points. So it's not necessarily judging them based on how they would mitigate it, but that if there's more environmental impacts, that's generally going to be more time consuming, more costly, that made us a little bit shy of those projects. So projects where that just doesn't exist, or it exists to a lesser extent, can get more points awarded to it. Does that help? Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, Austin. This is Alexa for people online. I'm not sure if I have a question or a curiosity, specifically with the Bike and Ped Complete Network. Assuming that a project is valued with the bike ped component. And I know in the past, there have been situations where a project has, I think it was last year in the TIP amendment, that ITD separated a project from sidewalk to the road upgrades. Would that affect in the future if the bike ped component were to be removed or separated into two different projects?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Alexa, for Communities in Motion, we are viewing it as one project. So a roadway project, to be consistent with our complete network policy, would have multimodal facilities associated with it. So when it gets to TIP prioritization, if those two are broken out, that would likely have an impact through the TIP prioritization process, which you all would be involved in how that prioritization process works. But from this standpoint, we didn't want to break those two out as two separate things. Frankly, while there are certain instances where that happens, most of the time those projects go together. And then it's in Communities in Motion 2050, we have that a few different times. And it's created a bit of a paperwork nightmare because we'll have 5 Mile Road as a project, and then we'll have the 5 Mile Road pathway as a project. And when it moves forward, are you amending two projects? Are you amending one? So it creates a bit of confusion. And like Tony was mentioning with the TIP policy, trying to avoid confusion and having the one project move forward, it was what we were hoping for with this structure.
Thank you.
I'd like to go back to Aaron's comment a minute ago about prioritizing projects that avoid or that are not environmental considerations. I think that seems a little perhaps counter to what we're trying to do here. That might incentivize people to ignore environmental problems on their application, to say to overlook or avoid them so that they don't get deducted points for them. And then secondly, the environmental projects are probably the more expensive ones, which are probably the ones that warrant some regional assistance. And finally, each project, if these are federal funded, need to mitigate all the impacts of those. So essentially every project will in some way mitigate the environmental considerations already. Your environmental consideration might be what projects might be actually improving or can show an improvement to environment, would be ones we prioritize, ones that perhaps move a road out of a wetland area or away from or restore a wetland. Does that align with what you were thinking, Aaron?
Mr. Chair, yeah, I think in general, it to me seemed more like a deduction. So it seemed like they were going to start, which is counter to the rest of them, where you're awarding points based on the criteria. They're going to start with 22 points, and if they have those environmental impacts, they're going to get a deduction, and therefore lose points in the point process. is the way I,
Mr. Chair, Aaron's interpretation is correct. Yeah, assuming there's no environmental impacts identified for a project, it would receive full points. As those start to stack up of considerations associated with the project, less and less points are awarded. To your initial question, ultimately, member agencies are not going to be submitting an application to us, so it's not like there's an opportunity for them to try to avoid the impacts of a project. We as a region are going to be identifying those regionally significant projects, and our environmental work group has identified what environmental considerations we should be looking for and has provided us data as to where all of those exist. So it's more of a GIS analysis of, okay, this corridor in this location is going to be widened. That'll expand the right-of-way. That right-of-way expansion will impact floodplain or migration patterns or historic properties along that corridor. Those would all be flagged as potential considerations. You are correct. Ultimately, to use funds, those would have to be mitigated. However, identifying projects that just require less mitigation was the broad direction that we were going.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just to keep talking about
Yeah.
the environmental side, I think in that case, I would encourage you, Austin, to go back and maybe expand a little bit on that section because it seems like it is a little vague. And even with this, I'm not 100% sure how we determine what is a low consideration versus medium or high. It seems pretty subjective, even with the data you're talking about. So if there's a way to give that a little more thought and
Yeah. Would it just for, pardon me, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
because ultimately my hope is that the memo that gets approved and where we ultimately land on scoring can be included in the plan to provide clarity as to how this prioritization process was done. We have a full list of what those environmental measures are that we've, as discussed with the environmental review work group. We could very easily copy and paste that from those meeting notes, put it into this memo so there is clarity. These are the specific factors we are looking for. Ultimately, what differentiates between a high, medium, and low, we need to identify the projects first, and then we'll create those tiers from there. Because in my head, I don't envision there's going to be any projects that have no consideration. So sort of where is that baseline? Are 3 or 4 factors low? Is that medium? We need to build out that list first, and we're certainly glad to come back to you all when we have those projects identified and have started scoring to show you where those tier breaks occur.
Thank you. Yes.
Austin, was there in the environmental work group, was there discussion about going along with what was mentioned earlier of, since this is about quality of life and environmental considerations, that a project that would improve some kind of environmental negative, that would be what you're trying to prioritize as opposed to avoiding environmental impacts?
Mr. Chair, Stephen, off of memory, I don't recall that being a big part of the conversation. It was more so focused on, are we looking in the right place? Do we have the most accurate data to be able to do that analysis?
As a follow-on comment, you talked about multiple factors and which one has, do we have some sort of prioritization of those factors? For instance, a land through an agricultural area, some would view as a huge environmental impact. A project near the Boise River may have a different environmental impact. Who's ranking those and determining which factor gets more credit versus the one that impacts the horned snail that happens to be in somebody's backyard?
Yes, Mr. Chair, for the environmental layer specifically, we did not weight the factors. We viewed them all as significant and important by being identified on the list. We did not make any distinction or judgment call that one of those factors is more or less important than the rest.
And if I could, there's also environmental justice areas that mark areas of historic low poverty that's tracked as an environmental impact area. Does that skew all those projects negatively?
So for those projects specifically, Mr. Chair, a bigger component of that is actually under the opportunity areas and specifically using the environmental justice screening tool that was previously provided by the feds. We went through and removed that as a scoring criteria. However, some of the factors that were important in there, such as income, still remain in our opportunity areas measure. So there are some demographic factors that will be included. However, we worked with an RTAC subcommittee to make sure that they were factors relevant and important to our region rather than previously recommended tools provided by the federal government that are no longer required for consideration.
Thank you.
All right, then for the congestion management process side of things, I will be honest, this one was because it's newer, right? The congestion management process came along in 2022. Trying to find out how to incorporate this into long-range plan project prioritization took a little bit more conversation as we had less to just build off and grow from the last iteration. But ultimately, in the congestion management process, it identifies specific strategies that member agencies can take to help either delay the need for a project or, if done in conjunction with the project, make the benefits seen from it extend longer, really improving the bang for the buck on any projects that we're doing throughout the region. It buckets those into, 5 main project types, just to give you a sense of what's included in there. So we have transportation demand management and active transportation type projects. So as we've touched on, if you're adding a multi-use pathway in association with your roadway, that is consistent with our congestion management process. Intelligent transportation system and transportation system management and operations. These are things like signal timing efforts or inclusion of roundabouts. Those can be consistent with our process as well. Transit operation and improvement strategies. I think that one's relatively straightforward if you're supporting bus infrastructure along the corridor. Similarly, freight goods mobilization, those multimodal components being considered with a roadway project. And then ultimately, roadway capacity strategies are included within this process. However, they're encouraged as the rest of it isn't going to cut it. So we need to widen the road. If we do widen the road, we still want to make sure those top 4 are also being considered in a concept of these projects as well. Where we landed with scoring for the congestion management process is breaking it out sort of into two categories. So we have a 30-point max, 20 of which will be specific to infrastructure associated with the project. So is your project constructing multi-use pathways? Are there park and ride lots along the corridor? Are you doing intersection improvements along the corridor as well? Or is access management a component of it? Those are all components that we can see through capital improvements plans around the valley, can award points to them. We also have 10 points that are more based on operational or systemic efforts associated with this. And that's where we're going to bring some of that conversation back to you all as RTAC for discussion, as other components included in our congestion management process include things such as education and outreach or incentives along specific corridors. And how to score those is more of a conversation that we want to have with you all as to how far is a project or an agency going to support the congestion management process in alignment with that process itself.
Austin, was access management, is that freeway access?
For access management specifically, I like to think of it as like center medians like we have on State Highway 55, or ways to just limit the amount of driveways on a lot of our corridors, not necessarily freeways, as ITD does have their specific standards for how often you can have interchanges along that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And you can get, that following question, the different items under the 20-point max, do you get 2 points or 4 points for each of the 5? Or is it how well that project addresses infrastructure things along there?
Yes, I believe it was 5 points for each, not necessarily 4. It is in your packet, so my apologies for sort of drawing a blank at the moment on what that exact number is. But there's more infrastructure strategies than just a few on the screen. If you have them, I believe it's 5 points per with a max of 20. So if you're going above and beyond, fantastic. We love to see that. However, we do need to put a cap on it at some point.
Thank you.
So getting to the active transportation components of this, I know I presented back in the fall about how the definition for what is a regional active transportation facility is really vague in federal guidance. So we have been working not only with FHWA to make sure we stay within those parameters, but we've worked with our active transportation work group to sort of break our pathways into 3 separate tiers. And then ultimately we are prioritizing group 1. So group 1 is our regional pathways. We're looking at they're connecting multiple jurisdictions, cities, counties. We also want these to extend at least a mile in length. If you're looking at a quarter-mile connection, while that can be extremely valuable as a connection, that pathway itself is not really spanning the region at that point. Group 2 is where we're looking at our pathways along arterials. Like we mentioned with the roadway component, many of our agencies are building multi-use pathways in conjunction with roadway projects. Those are very important to the overall network within the region and will be included in the plan. However, those are more so included in the roadway prioritization process than this active transportation process. And then for group 3 is all of those local connections. So the example I used a moment ago, a critical quarter-mile connection. Sometimes federal funds are needed to make those real tricky projects happen. So they'll still be included in the plan, eligible for funding. However, from that big regional perspective, we're not prioritizing every little connection. We're looking at the broad corridors as a whole. For example, the Boise River Greenbelt is the main corridor or the busiest corridor that exists within our community, getting more projects like that throughout the region. With that in mind, we worked with our active transportation work group to come up with a scoring of which of those corridors provides what is the priority corridors. We're looking at, again, those city connections. If you're connecting 1 or 2 cities, or if you're connecting 2 cities versus spanning 3 cities or 2 cities in a county, that is viewed as more regionally significant as you're connecting more users from around the region. Also, the level of completion was one thing that the work group wanted to look at, thinking that projects where we're almost done, but there's just a few of those gaps can really drive down the actual functionality, usability, overall volumes along those corridors. So closing those critical gaps was something that was important to this group as well. We will then, when we have that list, tier them and provide a multiplier. So if you score as a high corridor priority, you'll get 1.2 multiplier down to 1.0, and that will be applied to various segment scores that we've also been working with our work group to look at how we want to prioritize. So really looking at connectivity to other existing facilities to make sure we're building out that network, connectivity for first and last miles to our public schools and transit stops, proximity to key destinations following the definition included in, Matt is left, but the project scoring for the transportation improvement program that you all recommended approval of earlier, key destinations was defined in there. So looking at specifically our downtown areas or areas like the Village here in Meridian that really draw in that regional traffic. And then the opportunity index, same as the roadway side of things, bringing in that geographic factor on where that pathway is located. We'll then apply that multiplier to the overall segment score to help get a list of what are some of those critical segments along our regionally significant pathways that can likely lead to a TIP project or application in the future. Bring that back to our work group and certainly you all as well to make sure that we have that dialed in. Are we looking in the right places for what the priority projects should be for the region as we build out that prioritized list for inclusion in the long-range plan? For public transportation, we leaned heavily on our partners at Valley Regional Transit through Valley Connect 3.0. Their regional transit plan was built on a lot of the same goals and objectives of Communities in Motion 2055. Therefore, the project prioritization process that is included in VC 3.0 is working in the same direction as Communities in Motion 2055. So we wanted to make sure that we were supporting each other. So for this, we have the intent that we want to increase access to residential and commercial services throughout the region. We want to make sure that we're improving service specifically to those lower income areas. We're improving service to areas that have the potential for the greatest demand. So in our region, that east-west travel pattern is notably the predominant travel pattern. So supporting routes that help serve that, and then prioritizing routes that serve more than one jurisdiction. You'll notice a common trend between a few of these. As we are a regional planning organization, we want to make sure that we are connecting the region and the residents within it. So a majority of the points go based on population and jobs. We have that broken down looking at a quarter mile of transit stops. We have the total population and jobs along a route, as that number is certainly valuable, connecting more people and more jobs to each other. We also have the scoring that's looking at a per mile rate, as some of the routes can be rather long, some of the routes can be rather short. Looking at where there's transit supportive densities can also be valuable. So we awarded points for each of those. Looking at persons living within poverty, again, looking at those transit stop locations and a quarter mile buffer from there. And then the route orientation and connectivity to multiple cities, following up with the lower point totals awarded to those.
Austin, is this something where Compass will create this map and identify all transit routes and score each of them to give them a score to go into the application? Or is this where each application that comes in gets evaluated based on all of these?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of RTAC. So VC 3.0 has not yet been adopted by the VRT board. However, is anticipated to go before them next month. So assuming it's approved in August, that includes a list of projects to serve the region for transit. We will then take that approved list, apply this scoring process to it to prioritize them. VC 3.0 does include a prioritization process that this very closely mirrors, but there are a few distinctions, specifically demographics. We have Communities in Motion has a further out horizon year to it. So we are using the Compass 2055 demographics to inform those population and jobs. And we've been working with VRT staff to sort of look at what some of those slight tweaks could be and just make sure we understand why that would be the case and that both agencies are comfortable with where that lands us.
Thank you.
Yes. Then new to Communities in Motion. We do not have this in Communities in Motion 2050.
Mr. Chair,
Oh, yes.
I had a question.
Yes.
So it's interesting seeing all this. This might be an end of the presentation kind of question, but I've been waiting to talk about it on the public transportation. So I think I'll chime in now, which is seeing all this stuff together makes me ask the question, is it important to draw all of the goals of CIM through each of the mode types? Because it was really clear in the roadway section, how we're tying safety, convenience, quality of life, economic vitality into the evaluation. But we don't do that in the other modes.
Mhm.
That was just my observation, I guess.
Yeah.
Is it important to do that? Question mark.
Mr. Chair, members of RTAC, that's something we certainly can do. As we were developing these processes, we were structuring them in that way. It's like, okay, we have the convenience objective. What does that mean for each specific mode and how are we going to measure it? If we need to sort of change the way we're illustrating that story to make it a little bit more clear, we have that in some of our draft documents. Glad to incorporate it into the final one. Full transparency, one thing that we've struggled with at times is safety is obviously very important to the region. What makes a transit route more safe than another transit route is something that we've been struggling to incorporate in. So we can just provide the transparency that like a specific measure on that was a little bit difficult, other than the transit routes are operating on roadway corridors, and those corridors to get improvements will receive points, as well as those corridors that are important for transit will receive additional points. So trying to increase the scoring provided to roadways will help transit, but it's not explicitly in transit scoring, if that makes sense, but it's how they all intertwine and work together.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I guess a couple thoughts is, as we were going through this, I thought it might be useful to connect those goals to the specific measures in each of the other modes.
Mhm.
Safety and quality of life were a little bit more challenging to imagine how those might fit specifically with public transit. Not because they're not important things to consider when making investments in those modes, but because I think the level of project we're talking about at CIM doesn't fit. Like, there are safety improvements that we should be considering for transit, but they're not going to rise to the level of a regionally significant investment, right? And so maybe there are things, and same thing I'm thinking with active transportation. If we're talking about safety, there might be some specific safety things that we want to do to make active transportation pathways more or less, I mean, not less safe, more safe, but that's not going to be something that shows up in this prioritization, but maybe we just acknowledge that and then say things like safety would be addressed at like implementation level discussions, something like that. I don't know what the right word is because we're calling these projects and you can't call the other project. But those were a couple of thoughts that I had, because it starts to feel like the other modes aren't as directly connected to the original goals of communities in motion. I think we should make that connection explicit.
Thank you.
Is there a question that I agree with the comments. I just want to make sure I'm not leaving a question hanging.
This is an action item, is it not?
This is, yes.
So would we need to make some statement like that in a motion that says, please make the scoring criteria of the other modes connected to like, would that be the kind of action that would be actionable?
Yeah, so sort of having open dialogue here. For me, if it changes the scoring directly, I would like to see that in the action. If it's more of just Compass recommendation and direction to staff on how we sort of structure the memo in this chapter in Communities in Motion to help make that connection, and the scoring is already doing that, I think that direction has already been received. So I wouldn't necessarily feel that needs to be in an action. That's just more of a clarification thing as we're drafting the plan for us as staff to keep in mind.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Austin.
Yeah. So for road crossings, like I was mentioning, this is not included in Communities in Motion 2050. We wanted to bring it into Communities in Motion 2055 for a couple of different reasons. One, in working with our freight advisory work group a couple years back, we sort of sat down with them and was like, okay, what do you want us to look at for the long range plan? And rail crossings had come up. We weren't exactly sure what to do with the rail crossing. So what we decided to do was just pull all the data we thought was relevant and could find from FRA, from member agencies, and put it on a GIS dashboard, brought that to our freight work group, and was like, okay, here is data of existing conditions at rail crossings. What do we want to do with them? We've also seen a tremendous amount of success regarding competitive grant opportunities at rail locations, and then just heard anecdotally of interest in this throughout the region. So figured as a way to bolster some of those competitive grant applications, having a regional list of priorities would add Compass's sort of backing to some of these projects, make them more competitive for those grant opportunities. So this is a little bit more of a process that I'm outlining with you all today, rather than a specific methodology, as we want to work with some of the elected officials in the components or in the areas of our region that are most impacted by these rail crossings, acknowledging that it's not as big of a conversation piece in all of our member agencies. We want to sit down specifically with those who are impacted by this and make sure we're looking at things through the right lens. So what we have done thus far is we've pulled data on the average daily vehicle traffic of all of the rail crossings throughout Ada and Canyon County, ranked each of the crossings based on how many cars are going across this. Specifically to note, we're looking at grade crossings and public crossings as well. So a private lane or something that's grade separated, we've removed from this list here today. Also looking at volume of trains going through that crossing. So where are the busiest crossings, looking at vehicles as well as trains. Took this to our work group and then asked what other considerations are most important to include in scoring. We took the vehicle and train volumes and put them sort of in a quartile setup to help us focus on what are the ones with a lot of trains and a lot of cars, frankly. With that said, we do have the data for the whole list of crossings as well. So how deep the group wants to go in the list is still to be determined. But other data points that we've compiled and want to talk about with the elected officials in our region is the highest level of warning device. So here to my left, we have gates and flashing lights that can make you well aware that you are approaching crossing. To my right, we have a stop sign that's not actually near the train crossing. It is notably well before, and hope you're paying attention. So comparing those two to each other, we wanted to make sure we were able to do that. Looking at vehicle and train speeds, we have that data. We have active transportation facilities in the areas. Some of our crossings, we have regional pathways crossing them. Other ones, you don't have quite those facilities. So where those benefits could come in to help build out that network connectivity. And then something specifically that came up in our last RTAC meeting was growth. Looking at not only vehicular growth, so if a road's maybe not the highest average daily traffic right now, but there's a lot of growth anticipated in that area, how could that impact the prioritization of that crossing? And then looking at growth for trains as well. We've worked very hard on the high capacity transit planning and environmental linkages study, identifying where, if commuter rail is brought to the region, what portions of the corridor it would use, and have that included in the conversation. If train volumes increase, how does that impact our prioritization of these projects? So what we're planning on doing is just bringing this data to some of our elected officials and sort of asking for a sniff test. Like, is this matching your expectations? As this is something that is new to the plan, we want to make sure we get that local official buy-in. So again, for today, it's more of a process rather than the math formula itself, but still wanted to be transparent with you all as to where we are at and where we are heading with rail crossing prioritization. And then ultimately, why on earth are we doing all of this is the big question we want to make sure we all have in the back of our mind. One, to help make sure it's informing those conversations, like I mentioned earlier, with our local elected officials, state elected officials, to make sure that we're supporting the transportation needs of the region. And then very directly for many of you all, before our phase one applications open up here in a couple months, is projects that are prioritized in the long range plan directly improve and support getting projects in the transportation improvement program. So prioritized projects that we've identified as a major need for the region. If you as a local agency want to see that project through to implementation and need federal assistance to do so, it's going to make it easier through this process, and those two systems working together, which like we touched on at the beginning, is a big objective that we're trying to achieve here. So I know we've taken some questions in the middle. However, now that we've made it through each of the modes, are there any additional questions we can talk about before we get to the recommended
Yes.
motion?
See one from Tom.
Okay. Austin, bigger picture, and this kind of goes off of Stephen's comments earlier. Are these point totals meant to be aspirational or achievable? And I'll give you an example, and speaking kind of on behalf of the city partners with active transportation, I don't see us ever having a project that's over a mile in length and working with 6 or more jurisdictions at a time. And so while that it hits all of those regional components, feasibility wise, we've likely never had a project like that, and I don't see one of those coming from any of our partners anytime soon.
Yeah.
So whether that means we need to adjust some of the point totals to make it a little more realistic, or what that regional distance is, if it's half a mile, if it's working with 3 or more jurisdictions instead of 6, I think that's one thing that not a lot of skin in the game for ACHD, but would be worth the flag for the city partners.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Chair, Tom, it depends how you define achievable or aspirational. So specifically with, is any project going to get a perfect score? It better not. The way I've tried really hard to structure this is that a majority of the projects are going to fall in the middle, and that the cream of the crop rise to the top, so we can have those difference-making projects prioritized in the regional long-range plan. To the active transportations project specifically, that was why we wanted to break down the regionally significant corridors into segments that could then help inform project applications that would then go into the TIP. Because you're correct, we've never seen, and I don't expect to see, one long corridor come in at one time. That's too much of a beast of a project. Funding's tight. We all have a lot of other things that we want to see happen. But having the regional perspective, that I'll just go back to the Greenbelt example, extending the Boise River Greenbelt, if that ends up being the #1 priority, what portions of that can be done through a bite-sized manageable TIP project that we can then prioritize for future funding to make those those key connections and fill in the gaps along our key corridors. But in order to do that, we wanted to look at the corridors as a whole to make sure we had the big picture, and then identified specific projects within that picture. Was where we were going.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then my second comment was with regards to the rail crossing and crossing type, protection type. Just for consideration, when you do meet with the electeds and chat through, I'll give an example with Milwaukee by the mall. We've been told by Union Pacific that we would never have crossing arms at that location because it's just simply too wide of a cross section. And so taking into consideration, what the protection type is versus what can actually be installed or recommended installed at that location would be a good consideration to have.
Okay, thank you. I think that is good perspective. I did not know that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
building on Tom's comment about the CIM scoring, I guess I'm trying to understand a little bit how this works. So this is all leading towards Communities in Motion 2050, right?
2055.
Excuse me,
Yes.
2055. 5 years. Happens faster than you think.
Ah, thank you. Hopefully you filled out the survey. That is impressive.
So the question I have is, if you're talking about a corridor, which makes sense at a 2055 project or prioritization level, and let's say the green belt, for example, extending it was a project that was highly ranked in CIM 2055, but then you have a specific project that you're trying to get into the tip that is, as we said, like some portion of that higher priority thing. Are we not just taking the score of the total corridor and saying, hey, this project improves that corridor, it gets the score of the corridor? Or are we going to rescore each individual component of that corridor for scoring?
Yeah, we're breaking it out into various segments. And the reason we're leaning that way, ultimately, we can tweak it if that's the direction of the group. But there can be critical connections along, to just throw out another pathway, let's say the Wilson pathway. There could be a really critical connection that is on a overall corridor that may not score as high as the Boise River Greenbelt. We still wanted to provide a path for that path, pardon the pun, to be able to receive funds. However, we really wanted the focus to stay on those high priority corridors. So that's why if you're a high priority corridor, any segment you get is essentially getting a 20% bump. So for a lesser priority corridor, a segment of it to score better, it's going to have to be 25% better scoring in the other segment level measures. So for connectivity to schools and transit facilities and opportunity zones, it's going to have to be notably better to jump from a lesser corridor to a greater corridor. Does that make sense?
Can I ask
Yes.
a clarifying question? So Communities in Motion has things called projects,
Mm-hmm.
and they have certain extents.
Yes.
In a tip, let's say and you score all those things.
Yep.
Now we're in a given year and you have a specific project that maybe doesn't align exactly with the scope of what's in CIM 2055. Do you rescore your tip project according to everything that was in the CIM 2055 score? Or does it just get the points of the bigger corridor or project that it's part of? Does this make sense?
Yeah. Essentially, how do projects that, as you get the more information, like you were talking about earlier, do they potentially get rescored when they go into the tip or attempt to? Oh, yeah.
You want me to
I mean, I'm glad to explain
help? Go ahead.
what I have in mind
I'll
and beat
clarify
out
if
everything,
needed. Go
anything.
ahead.
Yeah. So what we do currently and how I'm envisioning it moving forward, I think pathways might be a tricky way to do it, but same process applies. So right now, say you're applying to the tip for an intersection project. We don't have any intersection projects in the long range plan right now. We have corridors. So if your intersection project is along that corridor, you get the prioritization of that corridor to your intersection project. Following that same process is what we're envisioning for Communities in Motion 2055. So even if the specific pathway might not be exactly called out, if it's along that corridor has a score, we can apply that to the specific segments as well.
That's great. That makes sense.
Okay.
And does that, sorry, the intersection that's on a corridor, if it happens to be by an active path, does it get a 20% boost?
If we're talking about like a roadway intersection, say
Yes,
you
a
want to
roadway
build
intersection.
a roundabout,
Yep.
that project is then going to be subject to the roadway scoring. So it gets active transportation connectivity points consistent with our complete network policy, not necessarily the 20% score multiplier, because that's housed for the pathway
Active.
scoring specifically.
Thank you.
Yes.
And Mr. Chair,
Yes.
obviously this has a lot of, we've been talking about it in terms of active transportation. I hope you understand. The same thing would apply on all of the transit corridors as well. We talk about whole transit corridors, but we might be making specific projects projects that are either improvements in frequency or investments along a corridor that isn't everything that's in the corridor. But I'm assuming the same would apply for public transit as well.
Mr. Chair, Stephen, yes, it applies to all project types because the regional plan is so big picture to be able to fund a complete project at once, like we were talking about with the pathways, similar to transit, similar to roadways. We don't see a whole roadway corridor come in at one time. We see intersections come in, then we see slightly under a mile long segments. Typically, it's piecemealed as we build out the corridor. But having that long-term vision is really what we're looking at here with our scoring.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Tony.
Hi, this is Tony. Yeah, I think y'all got there. And I think maybe it's just semantics. It's the way we're talking about it. But the way I look at it, the long range plan is going to be talking bigger picture. That's big corridors. And like Austin said, anything along that corridor is going to get the CIM score, whether it's a roadway, a pathway, a transit project. So yeah, it's maybe using the term corridor instead of project. I don't know. So we're looking big picture in the long range plan, little picture in a TIP project.
We've had lots of comments in the room here. Is there anything online? Or did you guys all understand it perfectly?
Mr. Chair, I had a quick question.
Yes, Nina.
With regard to staying on the active transportation topic, what would be the radius of being considered along the corridor? Are we thinking like directly parallel to it, or is that kind of within the application to make the argument of this is 0.25 miles away from X corridor on the CIM 2055? And is that something that is just determined within the application?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Nina, I'll provide a real world example of how it's actually worked in the past and how I envision it working in the future. Most projects we're going to see are along these key corridors we've identified, give or take a matter of feet. With that said, there are some times where building in the previously identified right-of-way can be a little bit tricky. So you might need to move off of it a little bit, but then you're still following the same general connection and making those key connections. So specifically, and Nina, I apologize, I am now blanking on the name of it. There is a pathway in the TIP between Hill Road and State Street in the north side of Boise. That project came through for TIP scoring. While we didn't have that specific, I believe it's following an irrigation ditch identified, because it was making the key active transportation connections between State and Hill that were identified in the plan, we still gave it the Communities in Motion score that it had in Communities in Motion 2050. So there is a little bit of a buffer, I guess, I believe was the word you would use, that we've done in the past. However, ultimately, we brought that to RTAC as part of the conversation when we were deciding if we wanted to add it in the transportation improvement program, and that was where we had landed with that project.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Tony, yes.
Another clarification. Yeah, I think we're getting into the weeds a little bit with how projects in the long range plan end up feeding into the TIP. Remember, this is kind of a first step. This process of scoring projects and using a performance-based planning process is going to get us that first step into these are the corridors that are needed. These are the transit projects that are needed. That gives it a score based on a process. After that process, again, we're looking big picture. After that process, it goes through additional discussion. Your recommendation to the board could be different than those scores. The board could take your recommendation and take project Z and make it A. Based on political issues or other issues that they see outside of the scoring process. So this is really just a first step to get us a list of projects to talk about. And then all the specific projects that go into funding in the TIP, that's totally different process. So this process that Austin is talking about today has gone through a lot of discussion just to get us to the performance-based planning. And that just gets us the first step. So a lot of discussion coming on specific corridor level later. And then beyond that, once we get our corridors prioritized, that's when we get into projects for the tip. So anyway, hopefully that helps clarify a little bit. We're really at the like 100,000 foot level right now.
Look, I'm not hearing anything online. I'd like to make the comment that from what I've heard today, I think I'm fine with everything except that environmental section. And I think that's doing the opposite of what it should be doing by steering projects away from an environmental corridor where those are the tougher things to fix. And those are the ones that might have some regional benefit to the environment that are overlooked. And we might want to prioritize those projects in here rather than work to exclude them, which I think is what's happening here. It's also, and I probably should have followed along better last week when you were explaining all this, all the criteria, environmental is a broad topic, and having a select couple people deciding which environmental ones we include, which ones we don't, seems scary to me as we're looking down. It's not predictable or I don't have a good feel for how all that got decided and know that in the future. So I think with the exception of that one, I think I'd recommend moving approval of what you're seeking here, but I'd like a pathway to relook at that environmental section, but I think I'm only one person. So if other people would like to, if think I'm nuts, just go ahead and approve this and I'll go along with everybody and move on. If other people have the same concerns, maybe we explore a way to approve it without that or table the approval until next month when we can have more discussion on the specific environmental section.
Mr.
Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, I echo those comments. I just wasn't able to articulate it. I think it obviously spurred a lot of conversation. I still have concern with it. I would like to see something different or modified.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that particular subject?
Mr. Chair, this is Andrew. I agree with your concerns about that, and with our limited travel opportunities across the river in most of the areas of the valley. I think that's a valid concern to have.
Thank you. Any other comments? Oh, Aaron.
So we had that discussion earlier on project versus corridors. Should this say corridor, 2055 corridor prioritization, or is this project? I'm all confused now.
Mr. Chair, Aaron, sort of, I think what I've gathered from this conversation is it sounds like corridor is a little bit easier to relate to. So I'm glad to change that term moving forward. When I drafted this item, we were referring to, and in Communities in Motion 2055, we refer to the corridors as projects. Glad to change that moving forward to help improve the clarity.
Stephen, you had asked for additional clarification on how integrating the priorities specifically through each of the sections. Is that something you would, if we were to make a motion to table or amend, I'm assuming that's something you would like to carry forward? And
Yeah, Mr. Chair, based on the comments from staff, it sounds like the direction to integrate the projects, or sorry, the goals into the prioritization could be done without specifically being mentioned in the motion. And it sounded like they got that direction. I'm assuming that would carry forward whether we table this or not. So yes.
thank you. Austin, do you have a preference? Would it help us to approve some things short of that environmental section and then relook at that scoring? Or do we need to do this as a whole, which would be?
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, members of RTAC, ultimately, we wanted this item, as I mentioned, we want roadway prioritization to be recommended before the August board. we do have another RTAC meeting before the August board meeting. With that said, for weird paperwork minutia on the back end that I just want to make sure everyone is aware of, my materials for the RTAC or for the board packet in August are then going to be due before the RTAC meeting itself. So at that meeting, it's going to be pretty tight that like we won't really be able to make changes in that one without then having the board packet be wrong, which I really don't want to do. So for this one specifically, I can bring it back in August. I just want to make sure I deliver on what the group is looking for. So if it's come back in August with what specifically are the data layers that we're considering in the environmental score, as well as potentially inverse the way we have the scoring structure now. Are there any other questions I guess the group would like to have answered in advance of that meeting so I can just make sure I come prepared?
Tom.
Mr. Chair, another alternative I'm curious we could have is have RTAC recommend this, but remand it back to the subcommittee to flesh out, the final details on environmental. We'll give the preliminary approval now and just, trust that the subcommittee can come to an agreement and ideally, skip the requirement to come back in August. Is that a potential?
If that's something that RTAC is in support with, I don't have concerns with that other than not everyone here is part of the subcommittee. So just want to be transparent about that.
Yes. I'm thinking if we I'd like to make an approval subject to, I think it needs to come back to this committee and not just be at the subcommittee level. I think you've heard our concerns. If you'd like to interact with any of us, I think a couple of us have expressed what the concerns were we have. If you'd like to hear those more, Aaron or myself, I think could articulate those, or you could reach out to other people that have spoken on that so far. And then at some point address that environmental section at a later time. And that's probably I agree, that's probably not something we do and then insert into the packet as a last minute. And it may not even be something we can get done in August. But we'd like you to take your time and get it right rather than get it through. But we're happy. I think we'll be okay to recommend the rest of everything moving forward. And you might even be able to, at the next time, come back with specific examples of how that environmental scoring affected the projects or the corridors that you were looking at, and make sure that that's what we want to do. So with all that, do we have a motion to approve? What are we? We are a motion to. Yes.
Sorry, I have one question. This is Craig with Meridian, just for Austin.
Go ahead, Craig.
Hi, Austin. Sorry, I was looking through the packet that you included, and I had a question about your segment scoring. Mostly, I want to know how you came to that kind of decision to have existing pathways in that segment scoring or planned pathways score higher, because I feel like that would create like pathways that are basically complete would rank really high, but wouldn't that create effects of areas that are basically being developed, like rich get richer kind of effect, like pathways that need impact and opportunity are not going to rank as high as preferred pathways? I'm missing the understanding there. Maybe you can explain it. Sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Craig, no worries. So for that one, really the intent is to complete pathways where we've had a lot of momentum so far. So if there is an existing gap in a pathway that is predominantly built out, to make that infrastructure that exists most valuable, we felt would be to get rid of some of those gaps in it before we move on to the next sort of planned project that may have notably less infrastructure in place already on it. So essentially finish what we've started before we move on to the next thing was the thought process there in the conversation with the work group to get us to where the proposal today.
Thank you, Craig. Anything further or? All right,
No, thank you.
thank you. Is there a motion to recommend to the Compass Board of Directors approval of the community's motion 2025 corridor prioritization methodology with the exception of the environmental considerations section? Not hearing a motion. Is there a motion to, is there an alternate motion anyone would like to make? Not hearing a motion is that we'd like to table this item for a subsequent meeting. Is anybody still there? Did our network connection go down?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Brian.
so I'm not, Austin knows where I am with all this, and this isn't new to most people, but I have a real hard time with adopting methodology to be used in the future without seeing, we're driving this formula. But I haven't seen how these points work out on anything. I don't have any examples. I don't have any basis for understanding. Like, it just makes me really uncomfortable, which is why I'm not making a motion. But I hear you. I understand the pressure and need. But that uncertainty causes me a lot of anxiety.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to table.
I have a motion to table this until a date certain or future date.
Future date?
Table to a future date. Do I have a second?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
would that tabling include a remand to the work group and then have that presented in a future meeting?
That was acceptable to the motion. So the amended motion is to table to a future date with a remand to the work groups to address the environmental considerations and incorporating the incorporation of the priorities into the various sections with a request that we may potentially see scoring results, how this would affect the corridors moving forward. That's the amended motion. Is that a second?
We second. Here.
Oh,
Hi.
Hannah, thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second.
Mr. Chair, discussion? Quick
Discussion.
Question?
Stephen.
So, Austin, thinking about what Brian was saying, when would be the earliest that you, like, we're talking about developing a methodology that would be applied to projects in the future. We don't have those projects for 2055 done yet, right? So is there, like, would you be able to rerun like the current 2050 projects to see how this applies?
Mr. Chair, members of RTAC, I can bring a list of the 2050 projects so you could sort of see. To be able to apply all of the scoring to it is a multiple month-long process. That was why us as staff, we wanted direction from you all as what should we be doing over the next couple of months? What process should we carry out that we can then bring it back to you all with, okay, here's the projects we've identified. Here's how they've scored. Do we like that? Do we want to revise the scoring process based on information? Because I do agree with Brian's comment, as you start working through these, there's probably something that we didn't consider that we just are struggling to think of right now.
Austin, if we didn't ask for the list of projects adjusted, but we asked for the corridors, how the corridors would rank out of this.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, corridors. It's still going to take months to score most of the corridors. Again, because modeling goes into this to identify what are all of those corridors and then how well they potentially score. Ultimately, those lists will still come back to you all for discussion. And if there's any adjustments that need to be made at that time, we can get there. But us as staff, because it takes such a time commitment, we want direction to make sure there's a general buy-in on how we should be spending that time to bring useful information back to you all.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, I might make a substitute motion.
Yes.
And to say that our tech request Compass staff to take the prioritization process back to the subcommittee to consider changes to the environmental as discussed and incorporate the goals of CIM into the other modes. And not come back, I mean, in other words, removing any mention of bringing all of the projects back to scored, because that.
Thank you. Assuming that's still amenable to the original. It is. So so can I get a second on that revised? What the latest motion, what Stephen just said? Hannah seconded that, right? So I still have your second?
Second.
Still seconded. All right. Any further discussion? All right. Not hearing any. Voting on tabling this request, remanding it back to the session for the 2 items that we've talked about. All in favor, say aye.
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 Do I hear a nay? Any opposed? I have 1 nay. It sounds like the ayes have it. We will remand that back to Austin. Thank you for your time and your input. This is a lot of work, and even to get 95% of it.
Yeah.
So we all it was a lot and accomplished.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that takes us through our action items. We have status reports, our RTAC agenda worksheet. Tony, do you have anything you had mentioned? And we have the next meeting. We'll get to there, but RTAC agenda worksheet is in there, obligation report is on there. And then the next meeting is August 5th. And Tony, you had mentioned that one will be a relatively short one, but is important to have people there because there's something important to do.
There is. We need to make a recommendation for the transportation improvement program for next year. So yes, please show up. It's going to probably be a little bit hard to get quorum. So please let Terry know as soon as you know you're available. But please try to be available.
Thank you. And that is our August meeting. We will not have another one in August. The next one will be the end of September.
That is true.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Stephen.
based on our last motion, is it possible then that we would also have this item back in August? Is that what I understand?
Yes, that could be possible.
It's
So
all that's like 2 weeks, right? Or a week, 2 weeks. So
very
possible, but we'll let.
Mr. Chair, members of RTAC, it's going to be real tight. Frankly, the materials are already drafted and on their internal review process to make it to you all in time. With that said, I'm going to walk upstairs and start making some of these changes. And ideally, I can get it back before you in August. If I have any hiccups, then it'll have to come back at a later.
Real quick can also be 5 years, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah. All right. That's the next meeting. Adjourn with our agenda complete. I'll adjourn the meeting and thank you all for coming. I don't need to call for a vote on adjournment. I can. We all okay adjourning? Say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Yep.